3 months after I turned 60, my right leg suddenly stopped feeling like it belonged to me, and I still remember the cold fear that went through my chest. I was standing in a grocery store, reaching for a bag of rice, when my leg buckled without warning, and for one terrible second, I wondered whether I had simply become old overnight. What I did not know then was that a weak leg can sometimes be an ordinary sign of losing muscle, but sometimes it can be the body's way of asking for immediate attention. I learned that lesson slowly, and I wish I had learned it sooner. I am now in my 90s, and after watching several generations grow old around me, I no longer say, that is just aging, quite so easily. I have seen people regain confidence after months of barely trusting their own legs. And I have also seen people wait too long because they were embarrassed to admit something had changed. That difference matters. I want to tell you what happened to me, but I also want to begin with the warning I wish someone had whispered into my ear that afternoon. If weakness suddenly appears on one side of the body, especially together with a drooping face, trouble speaking, confusion, or sudden difficulty seeing or walking, I would never try to stretch it away or wait for it to pass. I would treat that as an emergency and call emergency services. I learned that sudden weakness can be one of the warning signs of a stroke, and minutes can matter. There is another quieter pattern I learned to respect. When my legs began aching, cramping, or feeling heavy mainly while I walked, then easing when I rested, I started wondering about circulation. I also learned that a colder foot, slow healing sores, or a noticeable difference between my two legs deserved medical attention rather than another excuse. And then there was the back. I once thought every weak leg came from the muscles themselves, until I learned how nerves traveling from the spine can affect strength, sensation, and movement. New weakness with severe back pain, numbness around the groin, or new bladder or bowel problems is not something I would exercise through. It needs urgent evaluation. But here is the part that gave me hope. Not every weak leg means disaster, and I discovered that after the frightening possibilities were checked, I still had something useful to work on. The question that changed my life was simple. What if my legs were not finished, but simply waiting for me to use them differently? I did not know the answer yet, and the next few months would show me something I never expected. I had spent years making little bargains with my legs without admitting it. I held the kitchen counter when I turned. I chose the closest parking space. I used my arms to rise from chairs even when I probably could have tried without them. I told myself I was being sensible, but underneath that explanation was fear. I remembered a woman named Ruth who lived near me when I was younger. She was well into her 80s and somehow still moved with the confidence of someone who trusted every step. I watched her carry groceries, garden, climb her porch steps, and bend down to pull weeds, and I wondered what she knew that I did not. One afternoon, I finally asked her. She laughed and said she had no secret, only habits she refused to abandon. That conversation stayed with me because I had been searching for something dramatic when she was talking about ordinary movements repeated for years. Around the same time, I met a rehabilitation specialist at a community class, and she helped me understand something I had never considered. My legs did not only need strength, they needed timing, balance, and practice. She watched me stand from a chair and told me that I was stronger than the way I was using my strength. I did not like hearing that. I liked it even less because I suspected she was right. I had begun moving as though the floor were dangerous. After one near fall, I shortened my steps, stiffened my knees, and reached for support before I truly needed it. The strange thing was that this caution made me less confident, and less confidence made me move even less. Then less movement made my legs weaker. I had built a little circle around myself without realizing it. I have seen that same circle in people I knew in other countries too. In one family I met during a visit to Spain, An older woman told me she had stopped walking to the market because she was afraid of falling. Her daughter kept bringing everything to her, thinking she was helping. Within a few years, the woman rarely left her chair. In another family I knew in Canada, an older man kept walking every morning, even when he moved slowly, because he said his legs needed a reason to remember what they were for. I noticed the difference. He was not magically young. He simply kept asking his body to participate. That was when I began to wonder whether my greatest problem was weakness itself, or the story I had built around it. I still had not discovered the 5 movements that eventually became part of my life, but I had finally understood the first secret. I needed to listen before I tried to strengthen anything. Once I understood that weakness was not always something I should simply accept, I began watching the way older people moved in ordinary life. I noticed the woman who always reached for the railing before taking the first stair, the man who shuffled because he no longer trusted his toes to clear the floor, and the grandmother who could walk for 20 minutes but struggled terribly to rise from a low chair. Those little details taught me more than dramatic fitness demonstrations ever could. I began to understand that walking is not just about strong thighs. I need my ankles, calves, hips, feet, balance, and confidence to cooperate. I also learned something from my own kitchen. When I started preparing simple meals with enough protein, beans, lentils, eggs, yogurt, fish, vegetables, and fruit, I felt that I was giving my body better material to work with. I never believed food was a cure for weakness, and I would not tell anyone that it is. But I came to see nutrition as one quiet part of the picture. A muscle needs something to rebuild from, and an older person who barely eats all day cannot expect exercise alone to solve everything. I remember a friend who ate almost nothing at breakfast because she was afraid of gaining weight. By afternoon, she was exhausted, and she wondered why her legs felt empty. We changed nothing dramatic. She simply began eating a real breakfast with yogurt, eggs, fruit, or beans, depending on the day, and she told me that her afternoons felt different. That was her experience, not a promise for everyone, but it reminded me how connected ordinary habits can be. Then I discovered something even more important. Consistency mattered more than intensity. I had spent too much of my life thinking that exercise had to leave me tired to count. At my age, I learned to value controlled movement instead. A few careful repetitions performed regularly could become part of my life, while an ambitious routine I hated would disappear after a week. I also learned that my legs responded better when I stopped rushing. I began moving from bed to standing more deliberately. I let my feet settle before I rose. I paid attention to where my weight was. I stopped treating every movement as something I needed to finish quickly. That small change surprised me. I felt calmer, and my movements became cleaner. But I still had a question that frightened me. Could I actually rebuild enough strength to make everyday life easier? I was about to find out, because the first exercise I tried looked almost too simple to matter, and yet it became the movement that showed me just how much confidence I had lost. The first exercise I learned was the sit to stand, and I almost laughed when I heard it, because I had spent decades sitting down and standing up without giving it a second thought. Now it had become a test. I placed a sturdy chair where it could not slide, moved toward the front edge, planted both feet firmly, leaned forward slightly, and stood. Then I lowered myself slowly instead of dropping into the chair. At first, I used my fingertips for support because I wanted safety more than pride. I began with only a few repetitions, and I noticed something that surprised me. My movement was not just weak, it was hesitant. With practice, the hesitation started to shrink. The second movement was heel raises. I stood behind my kitchen counter with my fingertips resting lightly on it, lifted my heels slowly, paused, and lowered them with control. I learned that the calf muscles help with pushing forward during walking and with small corrections when the ground is uneven. I did not need to make the movement dramatic. I needed to make it steady. The third was toe raises. I kept my heels on the floor and lifted my toes toward my shins, then lowered them. This seemed almost ridiculous until I remembered how often my toes needed to clear rugs, thresholds, and uneven ground. I had spent years thinking only about my thighs, while the front of my lower legs had been quietly doing their own important work. The fourth movement was a step up. I used the bottom stair, held the railing, stepped up carefully, brought the other foot beside it, and stepped down slowly. I did not try to prove anything. If the full step felt too difficult, I practiced simply tapping one foot onto the step and returning it. I learned that a smaller movement performed confidently was more useful to me than a bigger movement performed in fear. The fifth movement was a side leg raise. Holding the back of my chair, I kept my toes pointing forward and moved one leg gently out to the side without leaning my body. I felt the muscles around my hip working, and over time I noticed that turning and changing direction felt more organized. I did not become young again. That was never the goal. I became more willing to move. I could stand from chairs with less planning. I could approach stairs without rehearsing every step in my head. I could walk across the yard and trust my feet a little more. I also began taking short walks on the days when I was not doing these exercises. I never wanted punishment. I wanted repetition. I wanted my body to hear the same calm message again and again. We are still moving. We are still practicing, and we do not need to panic. But there was one mistake I made during those first weeks that nearly sent me backward, and it had nothing to do with the exercises themselves. I thought more exercise would automatically mean more progress. So one morning I decided to do everything twice, walk farther, and prove to myself that I was serious. By evening, my legs were tired, and my confidence was worse than it had been the day before. That taught me a lesson I still carry. Older bodies often reward patience more than bravado. I began doing fewer repetitions, paying closer attention to form, and giving myself time to recover. I also stopped sitting for long stretches whenever I could help it. I would stand, walk to the mailbox, prepare a meal, water plants, or simply cross the room. These were not workouts. They were reminders that my legs belonged in my daily life. I also began thinking differently about food. I had watched too many older people lose appetite and then lose strength along with it. I started making meals that were simple but nourishing. Lentil soup became a favorite. I ate eggs, plain yogurt, beans, fish when I could afford it, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds. I especially liked spinach, berries, apples, and pumpkin seeds because they were easy to add to meals, although I never treated anyone food as a miracle. I had learned enough by then to be suspicious of miracle language. I also paid attention to hydration and sleep because tired, dehydrated days made movement harder for me. But the most unexpected change came from my mind. I stopped saying, "I am just getting old," every time something became difficult. Aging is real, and I respect it. My joints are not the joints I had at 30. My recovery is slower. I need more care with slippery floors and uneven ground. I also learned that age was not a complete explanation for every change. Sometimes my body was simply asking for practice. Other times it was asking for a medical check. That distinction became very important. If my weakness became sudden, one-sided, progressively worse, or accompanied by numbness, unusual pain, repeated falls, or other concerning symptoms, I would not use my exercises as an excuse to wait. I would get checked. I also learned that pain with walking that repeatedly improved with rest, a colder or pale foot, or wounds that were slow to heal, could deserve a conversation with a healthcare professional, because circulation problems can sometimes hide behind what looks like ordinary leg tiredness. And I learned to respect the spine too. A nerve problem can sometimes affect a leg even when the muscle itself is not the original problem. Severe new back pain, together with weakness, numbness in the saddle area, or changes in bladder or bowel control, is a reason for urgent medical attention. Knowing those things did not make me more frightened. Strange as it sounds, they made me calmer, because I finally knew when exercise was appropriate and when listening meant asking for help. Yet there was still one deeper lesson waiting for me, and it had to do with independence itself. I used to think independence meant never needing anyone, and that belief caused me more trouble than I liked to admit. I was proud of doing everything myself, so when my legs weakened, I hid it. I did not want my children worrying. I did not want neighbors offering help. I did not want anyone looking at me and seeing an old woman who might need assistance. But I eventually understood that asking for an evaluation is not surrender, and holding a counter during an exercise is not failure. Sometimes the smartest thing I can do for my independence is accept a little support while I rebuild. That realization changed the way I practiced. I kept a sturdy chair nearby. I used the kitchen counter for balance. I made sure the floor was clear. I wore shoes with good grip when necessary. I did not exercise when I felt dizzy, had chest pain, or experienced sharp pain. And I understood that recent surgery, a major medical condition, or a significant arthritis flare could be reasons to ask a doctor or physical therapist for guidance before starting. I also learned that 5 movements do not have to become a complicated program. My simple routine was sit to stands, heel raises, toe raises, step ups, and side leg raises. Some days I did only one set. Some days I did more. I walked on other days when I felt well enough. The point was never to win against my younger self. The point was to make tomorrow's ordinary tasks a little less intimidating. I remember the first time I carried a small bag of groceries from the car without immediately looking for somewhere to sit. I remember walking across wet grass with more attention and less panic. I remember standing at the kitchen sink long enough to peel apples without shifting from foot to foot because my legs felt exhausted. These were tiny victories, but at my age I know that tiny victories are often the ones that build a life. I also kept eating real meals. I tried to include a source of protein and some colorful vegetables or fruit rather than relying on snacks all day. I cooked lentils, beans, eggs, fish, yogurt, spinach, berries, apples, and other ordinary foods that fit my budget and preferences. I never expected food to repair a medical problem by itself. I simply wanted to give my body useful building blocks while I stayed active. And I kept people around me. I called friends. I visited family. I helped when I could. I found reasons to leave the house. I learned that purpose matters to me almost as much as exercise. When I have somewhere to go and someone waiting to see me, I naturally move more. That may sound simple, but simplicity has carried me farther than most complicated plans ever did. And then, one morning, I realized the most important change had happened without me noticing it. I stood beside my kitchen chair, placed both feet on the floor, and rose without thinking about whether I could do it. That was the moment I understood what all those months had really given me. They had not erased my age, and they had not guaranteed that I would never have another health problem. They had given me trust. I trusted my legs a little more. I trusted my balance a little more. I trusted myself to notice changes instead of hiding them. Looking back now, I think that was the greatest gift. I began this story with the day my right leg suddenly failed me, because that frightened me into paying attention. But I do not want fear to be the final message I leave with you. My final message is much gentler. Weak legs after 60 deserve curiosity, not shame. Sometimes weakness comes from inactivity or muscle loss, and can improve with appropriate training. Sometimes balance can be practiced. Sometimes nutrition, sleep, daily movement, and enough protein can support the work our muscles are trying to do. But sometimes weakness is a warning from the brain, the circulation, the nerves, or the spine. And no exercise video should replace proper medical evaluation. I learned to respect both sides of that truth. If weakness suddenly appears on one side with signs such as facial drooping, trouble speaking, confusion, or sudden trouble walking, I would seek emergency help immediately. If my leg symptoms repeatedly appeared with walking and improved with rest, or I noticed a cold foot, unusual color, or slow healing wound, I would ask for medical evaluation. If severe back pain came with new weakness, numbness around the groin, or bladder or bowel changes, I would not wait. And when those urgent concerns were not present, I would begin gently. I would clear a safe space, find a sturdy chair, and practice one simple movement at a time. I would eat real meals instead of expecting one miracle food to rescue me. I would walk when I safely could. I would rest when I needed to. Most of all, I would stop telling myself that every loss was inevitable simply because I had more birthdays behind me than ahead of me. I am well into my 90s, and I know something now that I did not understand at 60. Health is not a single dramatic decision. It is a conversation I have with my body every morning. Sometimes my body whispers. Sometimes it asks loudly for help. My job is to listen. If your world has started getting smaller because you are afraid of your own legs, I hope you remember my story and take one safe step toward making it larger again. I still believe there can be useful mornings ahead. I still believe small habits matter. And if you want to keep walking with me through simple, honest lessons about healthy aging, nourishing food, natural habits, strength, and independence, I would be very happy if you subscribe to this channel. We can keep learning together, one careful step at a time.